This is Bruno Sammartino, and you're listening to the Interactive Interview.
Welcome back to the show, and we're here today with the one and only living legend, Larry Zbyszko. I've seen all your shoot interviews. I've heard a lot of interviews with you, and a lot of my questions have already been answered, but I'm going to ask a couple that people haven't yet. But first, let's get started with the bare facts. Were you a wrestling fan growing up?
Well, you know, I was probably one of the biggest wrestling fans ever. You know, I loved it so much, I gave my life to it. Actually, James, it was like a destiny, something I knew when I was like 10, 12 years old. I saw it on TV, and I said, that's what I'm going to be, and I just knew it. I started wrestling amateur back in, got 8th grade in Pittsburgh, and just kind of followed the dream of a child, and it became a reality. So I guess it was fate.
Yeah.
But, you know, in order to do it, you have to be a big fan of it, so I guess I was one of the biggest fans.
Well, you did pretty good for yourself, I'd say that much. Who was one of your favorites growing up?
Well, Bruno was my hero. I mean, when I saw TV, you know, the first time I saw wrestling was in Pittsburgh, and Bruno was the man at the time, and he was my hero. I mean, he was the most impressive guy I ever seen. Unbelievable guy, but yeah, he was the influence that turned me into wrestling. I should have been a golfer. Much less painful. You know, I got all these arthroscopic surgeries, teeth replaced, elbow scope.
How did you end up meeting Bruno?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Some people don't ask me. Actually, I was such a big fan of his, and I found out that, you know, he went to the same church I did growing up, and I found out where he lived. So I think I was 16 years old, and I just got, you know, able to drive. So every time we go take a ride past Bruno's house, we could see Bruno, me and my buddy. And one afternoon, driving around his house, you know, through the hedges, sitting back by his pool, I saw Bruno. And you know, so I parked the car, and I sat there and talked to myself for 10, 15 minutes. My buddy was in the car too, but he didn't come. So I just kind of walked through his hedges, and I remember Bruno sitting there was playing with David, who was about like 3 or 4 years old, or real small kid at the time. And he looks around at me, and here's this guy sitting there with him. He looks like a gorilla. And I just introduced myself, and that's how it started.
And then how soon after that did you guys start training together?
Well, you know, it was probably a couple years after that. He was very impressed that I won the state championships in wrestling, and you know, once in a while I'd see him in his yard, I'd stop by, and probably a couple years after that, we actually started working out. Actually, we work out in his basement. He had a gym set up in his basement, a lot of heavy chest and heavy arms. I mean, at that time, when I, you know, first started working out with him, he was still doing over 500 pounds.
Wow.
And he must have been, you know, 40 years old.
Wow. When they brought you into the WWF at the time, they brought you in as his protege. Whose idea was that?
Well, actually, that was Bruno's idea, and it really filled me with confidence that, you know, such a big star would, you know, make me his protege. And, very flattering, and you know, and it gave me a big break to the public, because I was immediately accepted because of being Bruno's protege. The hard part was to live up to the expectations that people would put on you. You know, it would be like being Bruno's son, you know, I mean, or anybody famous, you know, if you're his son, you know, how do you fill his dad's footsteps, you know? So there was a lot of pressure on me, too, with that handle. So, actually, I found out over the years that I work much better under pressure.
One of the best angles I've ever seen was when you turned on Bruno and you had some really impressive numbers when you guys finally not in the ring together. How has that changed over the years, and do you think that something like that would work today?
Well, it was a unique situation, and it wasn't something that, like today, where some guy comes out and badmouths somebody or is in love with somebody's girlfriend or whatever, and all of a sudden they have a match next week or the same night. Because I was Bruno's protege, it actually had, it was 7 years in the making, and it just unfolded to the people so correctly that they had to watch. And it's a psychology and basically a lost art that only a handful of people alive still know today. And unfortunately, people running the wrestling business aren't some of them.
Well, I think we'll get into that a little bit later. My question for you, though, is do you think the fans would accept it as much today as they did back then? Do you think they still believe?
Yeah, if you use the wrestling psychology, I mean, people, especially the younger generation has been raised with this, well, these are the old school guys, and these are the new school guys who flip-flop around and dive through tables. There's a big difference. But if you know the wrestling business, you realize that none of that's true. There's only one system that works, and that's the system that makes money. And I come from a time before contracts and guaranteed money like these guys are on today. And if we didn't put people in the seats, we didn't eat food. It was just that simple. So you learned the psychology, and if you applied it today, to just use an example, when WCW was using it properly, we built the NWO up to be the biggest thing, and WCW became the biggest show, and beating Vince in the ratings week after week after week. We were doing it properly, and then they stopped doing it the right way and went into the new way. And boom, got canceled and thrown off the air, became raunchy and stupid. Just the simple logic of it. When the fans were chanting Goldberg, who's the champion of the world? The stupid writer, Russo. That should tell you right there. They weren't following the right way. If they did, we already proved it could work. It's the New World Order.
Absolutely.
It's just a psychology where people have to watch because you make it a good product.
Okay. How do you compare the American Wrestling Association to the World Wrestling Federation back then?
The American?
AWA.
The AWA?
Yes, Ron Gagne.
To what?
To Vince, to New York at the time.
At the time?
Yeah, at the time.
Well, in the days of the territories, the AWA was probably one of the last of the territories. The AWA and the Crockett's pretty much went at the same time, like the little bitty drugstore guy,
Yeah.
And, but in the days of the territories, the WWF, the WWF at the beginning, was a bigger territory in two terms. One was it's in the northeast part of the country, and it's got the most population. And all the cities, Boston, New York, Philly, Philadelphia, Washington, they're all multi-million people cities. And New York, of course, being huge. And so you got a big, giant, base to draw people from. So they were always bigger in that respect because of the population. And two, in the early days before nationwide cable, New York was the center of publicity because all the magazines came out of New York. Pro, the Wrestler, and all those old magazines. And all those came out of New York. So if you were wrestling in New York, you got most of the publicity. And people in other territories would hear about you via mainly the magazine. There was no internet. There was no television programs in other people's areas. But the AWA, on the other hand, Vern Gagne was a much better payoff man. In New York, the top guys might make a few more bucks, but the bottom guys weren't making all that great money. But I'll give you an example. If you wrestled the first match on Madison Square Garden, you get $300.
Huh.
If you wrestled the first match in St. Paul, you'd get $1,500.
Wow.
And the AWA was a great place to work in terms of wrestling because you made a lot of money 9 months during the winter and the fall and the spring, but in the summer, Vern didn't run too much. So the guys had a nice, easy summer, where in New York you'd wrestle all the time. It was grueling after a year or so, 7 years straight, 6 nights a week.
Why do you think the AWA eventually went under?
Well, it just, like I said, it was the last of the territories. It was run by a guy who was an old thinking style promoter. Basically, by the time, guys like the Crockett's and Byrne realized what was happening in terms of the cable nationwide, pay-per-view availability and all that, Vince had a big jump on him. They just didn't have the money, and they did at one point, but they couldn't cooperate, and they just didn't think the right way. I mean, the business was changing,
and they didn't go along with it.
These guys didn't believe in the change, and therefore couldn't do it the right way. And so it was just time. Plus, the guys were getting older. We're in the 70s. Had enough. Want to retire. So it just finally, it turned into the war of the two mega powers when the Crockett's had to sell out. Turner bought it, and Turner had enough money to compete with Vince, and WCW, then could exist. And you had two nationwide biggies, and if AOL wasn't a bunch of stupid lines, lives, WCW should still be on the air and still be doing the biggest ratings for TNT and TBS.
I guess I'll ask you this question now because I was going to ask you later, but the big rumor going around now is that Ted Turner now wants to start wrestling again.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I don't know. I know Ted was a big fan, and the only reason wrestling was on TBS primetime for 30 years was that Ted Turner loved it. And he didn't love it just as a fan. He also, knew as a businessman that it was his highest-rated show. We used to put wrestling matches on at the old baseball field to draw people in to watch the Braves when Ted first bought the Braves. And Ted always liked wrestling because it was good business. And that's why he was, stood behind WCW. He released the money, to make it big with, Nitro and Thunder. And then, unfortunately, it just got mismanaged. And then, AOL didn't want it for a merger, and the rest was history. But I hope so. But who knows?
When you first went to WCW, I guess you pretty much went right into a tag team with Arn Anderson. How would you evaluate your performance with Arn Anderson? And
well, I give myself an A+.
You have any good stories about Arn?
It was a good team because actually when Arn started, I used to help him out a lot. And me and Arn got along good. He was a great guy to travel with, a fun guy, and he was great in the ring. So when I came to WCW. Actually, I came out to the AWA when it closed and WCW first started.
It was like 91 or 92.
Yeah, I mean, they really didn't know what to do with Arn. And I was getting to the point where I didn't want to, wrestle a whole bunch. I was looking, we were talking about the broadcasting deal. But in the meantime, I said, yeah, you know what? I think it would be a great idea. So anyway, me and Arn, and boy, it went real good. I mean, me and Arn would walk out of the curtains, and the people would go nuts. And then I'd get in the ring and I'd start, doing my mental human game of chess by what some people would call
stalling.
But it actually wasn't stalling. It was a psychological approach which always worked. And the people would start chanting, Larry sucked, Larry sucked. And I'd be standing there like I wouldn't tie up for 10 minutes. And finally, Arn would crack. Arn would start yelling at me, "Come on, damn it, do something!" I said, "All right, let's listen to the people. They're chanting Larry sucks." And he says, "But they really mean it." I used to go nuts.
From then you went...
But the crowd would go nuts. If I started wrestling right away, I would be like everybody else. And the people would just sit there and go, "Oh, another arm drag, whoopee."
I was going to ask this later, but nowadays the only person you see really do any stalling is Hulk Hogan. And he comes out and stands there for 20 minutes and says nothing. Do you think he does it anywhere near as well as you do?
Well, Hogan's doing something different than I was doing. I was doing, building up the crowd for when the action started. Then I took them through the ceiling. But you have to do something to set them up before you can just take them to the ceiling. What Hogan's doing is, Hulk's walking out and getting a big ovation. And as long as the people are screaming, he'll just stand there and let them scream. That's, like Wrestling 101. But, he lied about me in his book, and I'm not happy about that. But, you still got to give Hogan credit. He knows how to, have the crowd make noise for him by doing as little as possible.
You started to touch on it a couple seconds ago, but right after your tag team, you pretty much became an announcer. Who was your favorite broadcast partner?
Oh God, they were all good. I mean, when I first started doing the broadcasting, I was doing it with Gordon solely.
Yeah.
And I was doing it with Gordon for a few years before he died.
Yeah.
And I guess he would be the favorite because, I learned a lot from Gordon, and he was an interesting character that I met over the years, but, not much because I never really wrestled in Florida or Georgia. I was usually either in the New York area or the AWA area. I had like 3 good long runs, New York, AWA, and then WCW. I was a fortunate guy. But, Gordon was, he was a classic. He was a classic and a funny guy. He was always schnockered. So, right between takes, had to go right to Reggie's and have a sandwich and a drink. And smoked one cigarette after another for years. I mean, it's amazing he lived as long as he did. But I tell you, he had a good time until he dropped away. So, God bless him.
One of the biggest draws for Saturday night in, I think it was 1993 or 1994, was when you wrestled Steven Regal.
Yeah.
It was on a Memorial Day, and I think at that time it drew a 3.1 rating, which at the time was huge.
That's very sharp of you. You're the first guy I've done a radio show with that even put those numbers together for that time, because WCW was having a little tough time, right?
Right.
And the ratings were down. They were like doing like a 1-2 or a 1-3. And I was broadcasting, and here comes Lord Regal. And he was great. I mean, you'd hate him, and all he'd do was just talk about just standing there and ticking people off. He did it better than I did. And then, he came out with the English wear and the foxtrot punch stuff, and then he'd do an interview and open his mouth, and he was great. And I'm trying to, at this time, me and a couple other guys were trying to tell the TBS, people, the corporation who didn't know what wrestling was, and I was just, look, let me give you an example. Watch these ratings. And then so I got involved with Regal, and I pulled off a match with Regal. And it had a great build-up. One week I think I got, Gene called me out, and I wound up with popping his manager, and he threw a fit. But then, it started off with interviews, and anyway, to show these people how to do it, I mean, we did it, we built it up. We had the match, and like you said, on Memorial Day, that's the day it was, summer? It
was, I think, a holiday, but I don't remember.
It was a holiday, and it was the hardest day of the year to draw a rating. And I think the week before, it was like low, like a 1.4. Me and Regal wrestled and did like a 2.3.
Yeah.
On the hardest day of the year. And then, as soon as we had those people convinced, and they were going, "Oh, God, Larry, yeah, that was great. Oh, this was great." That guy got fired. I mean, I was there like, the first 6 years I was with WCW, I had 6 different bosses. or not just me, but I mean 6 different heads of the company.
Yeah.
And they all lasted 6 or 8 months.
Except for Eric Bischoff.
Except for Eric. He lasted a little bit longer. Then they threw him out, then they brought him back. Then AOL wanted to buy it, but the company wouldn't tell anybody. So then they just, let Russo run it into the ground because they already knew they were going to sell it.
How do you evaluate Eric Bischoff's performance as the runner of the company?
Well, I don't know exactly everything Eric did, whether it was all great or some of it was shady. But you got to give the guy credit because he did get the funds and was able to make Nitro big. I mean, he did. He started the first good communication with the TBS upper echelon. I mean, the guys on the with the suits and ties.
Yeah.
And where other guys like Ole and Bill Watts and Jim Hurd and Jim Fry couldn't do it or wouldn't do it, Eric got to him. And he got to this Dr. Schiller, who was the head of TBS Sports. And the next thing you know, he's got Schiller riding his motorcycle over to Mount Rushmore, and and money was released in Nitro, and so you got to give the guy credit. He did do some things that let the shows get big. Unfortunately, he just got a little out of control of it. But it got so big so fast.
Yeah.
That I don't know if anybody could have controlled it at that time. It might have been already past the point of no return. But you'd have to change it. It would take a year or so to change it. And AOL just didn't want to do it.
Right. When the NWO came in, how did the company change?
Oh, well, it got super big. In fact, I mean, when the New World Order thing, got over so big, they bought us our own building, to put the studio in. And, set up the power plant inside. Our own building with everything, all the computers, the editing machines, the special effects machines, the school, the travel, the offices for bigwigs. It was all there. And they had. I mean, it was so stupid for them to cancel it. Stupid. And plus, they sold their library for peanuts.
Yeah, I think the exact number was $2.5 million.
Yeah, $2.5 million is like $1.
Yeah, I mean, for all that stuff, you could have.
I mean, you could have. You know how many thousands television shows you could put together with that footage over years?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, I have a. I have a huge collection of tapes, and I would have killed to get a hold of that thing. How do you evaluate your matches? Like, why do you think the matches with you and Eric Bischoff and you and Scott Hall were two of the, I guess you could say, most successful pay-per-view buy rates of the year 1997, 1998?
You're very sharp, James. You should be a detective.
Well, I look into my stuff.
Yeah, you certainly do. Actually, the two biggest buy rates WCW did is when I wrestled Bischoff and I wrestled Hall. And the reason, I mean, they would have been good anyway, because, the one was Sting versus Hogan, and we built that up for a year.
Yeah.
I mean, Sting was so boring and bad at the end of, with the blonde hair and the pants. And he called himself the name of a rock singer, did a bad interview, and then just screamed like Flair. That's all he did. So, in order to get him over, we had to shut him up, use a different outfit, and not let him do nothing. So we just lowered him to the ceiling.
Wow.
But it paid off, and it meant something. But me and Bischoff, I hate to brag, that was the psychology I told you about. That was a lost art now.
Yeah.
Well, I was involved in it, so all that psychology was applied. And it made people chant Larry for years. It got Bischoff heat. It was so novel for the broadcasting living legend to beat the snot out of this guy everybody hated. So people, like I said earlier, you just have to watch it. You have to buy it because it was great. And if that was evolving, now you had another novelty match the following month with me and Scott Hall. Scott Hall, the big, tough, member of the New World Order against the now broadcasting living legend who beat him in the past when he was first breaking in. I mean, it was a whole story, but it was so novel you had to see it. And you just, again, if they did that today, you know, instead of doing 3 8s and 4 1s, 3 7s, they'd be doing. God, I mean, McMahon should be doing 6s and 7s. I mean, there's no competition.
Well, that could be a problem, though. That could also be why it's not doing those numbers, because there is no competition.
Well, it may not be doing what there was when there was competition, but if you tie those ratings together, we were doing like 11.
Yeah, and now you're getting like a third of that.
But yeah, even if you lost half of it, you should be doing 5.5.
Yeah.
You know? But I mean, the entire family audience was turned off. They're the ones that buy the product, not 18-year-olds.
You think they'll ever go back to being a family product?
Well, if competition starts off, they might. If their business goes down anymore, they might, because, you know, sooner or later it boils down to the dollar. And I don't know what's going on exactly, but I hear that, you know, Vince has cut back on security staff and some of the guys and this and that. Now I hear rumors about Goldberg, and he's really trying to get Goldberg for WrestleMania, because without Goldberg, you really got nothing exciting and new.
Yep.
Even if Austin comes back and wrestles The Rock, what is that, the 15th time?
Plus, Austin's coming out there with 2 knee braces on and a bad neck, so he's not exactly.
You never know. And then, but anyway, the only thing about even thinking Goldberg means at least they're thinking in the right direction.
Right.
You know, because he's the only guy out there that you can really bring in to make it exciting. But then you'd have to go back to really making it a family audience thing, because you're not going to pick up your licensing and your marketing. And, I mean, you know, your 10-year-olds and your 12-year-olds that can't drive cars are the ones that sit home and play video games.
Right.
But 10 and 12-year-olds aren't allowed to watch TV now when your people are screwing dead bodies in coffins, and women are pretending to be lesbians and kissing and hugging each other in hotel rooms. So you lost your entire, you know, father and little sons and daughters audience.
I wholeheartedly agree.
That's why you lost more than half this percent of rating. You lost more than half your audience. And the 18 and 19-year-olds who, you know, the demographics they're playing to, they don't want to watch that. They're not going to run out and buy a wrestling game. They're going to go out and buy a CD for $20 or take a girlfriend to the movies or go out and sneak a Playboy or, you know, I mean, they're beyond. They're driving around in cars and dating and having fun. They're beyond sitting home playing wrestling video games.
Right, I agree.
Lost all that.
Well, I think...
So they may change it if they realize that.
Do you think they realize it?
Well, probably, because Howard Finkel will have a report of this internet thing on Vince's death the next day. Whether they'll do it or not is another story.
We kind of got a little off track, but I wanted to talk about the last couple of years of WCW after the NWO faded out and they brought Russo in. What was your opinion of that?
Well, I knew it was going to die. I mean, it's funny why they brought Russo in, because this guy, Bill Bush, who was an accountant, and a very nice guy,
right,
wound up running the company after they removed Eric for some reason. I'm really not sure what the whole story is. But Bill Bush was under temporary control, and some people around him, for some unknown reason, convinced him that they heard that, you know, Vince has these writers. And this Vince Russo guy is Vince's writer, and that's the reason that Vince is now beating them in the ratings, okay? The reality was that the New World Order and the guys, they messed it up. And it was just, you know, bad management and talent that wasn't listed and thought they knew better, and they didn't, and they ruined it. So it wasn't that Vince was doing good. It was that WCW started doing really bad and messed up this whole thing. So Vince, you know, was getting watched more. But Bill Bush thinks that Vince Russo was the secret weapon, so he hires this writer. In fact, one day he said to me, he's all excited. He said, "Hey Larry, I stole McMahon's secret weapon. I got Vince Russo, the writer." I said, "Why the hell did you do that?" He says, "Look, he was the secret weapon, and I took him, and guess what? It was easy. He even wasn't under contract." And still, he wasn't under contract because he's not needed. He's not the secret weapon.
Wow.
But anyway, they found out the hard way. But yes, again, but then like 2 or 3 months after Bill Bush hires Russo, Bill Bush leaves the company.
And
But obviously he found out it was getting to be ready to be sold, so he jumped ship. I mean, it was amazing. You could make a movie
about the last couple of years of WCW.
I mean, I got a script in my mind for a movie. I should call the Coen Brothers. The Coen Brothers. They make the greatest movies, man. The Big Lebowski and the last one they made with Oh Brother. Oh, that's great.
Or out there, yeah.
Yeah, I got a script. You could just call it, like Monday Nitro. The whole story of the corporation obtaining it, getting so gigantic that they didn't know what to do with it, and then and the very end when they were, planning secretly to get rid of it when AWA came in to screw them over. I mean, you could make a movie out of the whole thing. It was such a ridiculous chain of events. There was one point when Ole was running it, right?
Yeah.
Guys were starting to make the contract thing because they were combining salary with merchandising.
Right.
And if one guy, sold $150,000 worth of merchandising last year, they'd say, well, hey, let's just put that in his contract and add it to his pay, and then we don't got to deal with any extra merchandising nonsense. We'll just keep all that. But they didn't realize the guy's only going to sell it for 1 year, because next year the people are going to want to buy somebody else's. How many Sting shirts can you buy?
Right.
So anyway, so then the contract started getting bigger, and Ole was pulling his hair out by the roots. He would say, no, you're wasting money. You don't have to give these guys that money up front. That's ridiculous. They're not drawing. You're going to lose your ass. And the guy would tell Ole, the TBS company guy would tell Ole, he'd say, look, I've got to spend a lot of money, or my big bosses won't think I'm doing my job. They told me to, take this money and make WCW. So he had to spend, he basically had to blow a lot of money, or he's afraid he'd lose his job. Is that amazing?
Yeah. I wish I had that kind of...
A professional money waster.
Wow. Sign me up.
Thank God for WCW. That's all I could say.
Were you a part of the company when it closed?
What do you mean, a part of it?
Well, were you collecting a paycheck, basically?
Oh, yeah, I was collecting a paycheck till right before it closed. And I was officially out of the company probably 3 or 4 months. I think my deal ran out. And they didn't want to renew it because they knew that they were going to get rid of it. And mine ran out about 3 or 4 months before it closed.
What did you do in between... once you got out of WCW?
I played a lot of golf. And I'm still in the wrestling business. I love the wrestling business, and unfortunately there's really nowhere to broadcast. I love that, but I still love the fans and love to wrestle. So I've been, I started getting a lot of phone calls from all the independent promoters. And there's a bunch of people that watch it, but, they all run like Friday, Saturdays. But so on the weekends I do that stuff, and now the NWA, TNA people, we worked out a deal, and that's a nice Wednesday, national pay-per-view, and that was a fun thing. They got a nice setup there, and they're all over Australia now on Vince's old cable pay-per-view every Wednesday from the whole country of Australia. They're in Japan, a bunch of Asian countries here, and they're always working on some TV, so we'll see if we can help them out. So that's it. And during the week, I play some golf here and there on the professional mini tours and qualifiers. Just kind of living happily ever after in Larry land.
One guy you're working with right now in NWA TNA is AJ Styles. How do you evaluate your matches with AJ?
Well, I'm a perfectionist. I'm the harshest critic of myself. I hate me more than Meltzer hates me. But,
that's kind of hard to believe.
Yeah, but I thought they were kind of good. I mean, I hate to watch my matches really because I'm too critical. So I just kind of go by feedback of what other people say. And I could feel the crowd, and it felt good, and I knew things looked good. And all the feedback I got was that it got over good. Everybody loved it. We'll do what we can do to help them out. AJ Styles is a talented guy. the biggest thing, to learn. It's hard to learn when there's no one to wrestle that knows, and you can't learn.
Do you think that's why they're bringing back some of the quote-unquote old school guys? To try to teach them how to...
Well, yeah, I think that, their idea, they don't want to lose that tradition. Of course, it's a perfect, novelty because Russo is such an what you would call a tradition guy.
Yeah.
And wrestling fans have seen enough wrestling to know, traditional guys, I don't even like to use that word, but, the guys who are just professional wrestling guys.
Yeah.
You like to present it more one way because that's what professional wrestling fans want to see. If you don't want to watch professional wrestling, then don't watch it. That's how it's always been. Russo's theory is, he don't care if you're a wrestling fan or not. He just wants some idiot to watch something about sex. Whether it's dancing in a cage or laying in a coffin or wrestling in Jell-O, as long as it's a nighty bikini, flopping around, he'd much rather do that because he thinks that the fans are a bunch of idiots. and he don't like, he'll even admit it. He don't like wrestling. He thinks it should be, a bunch of goofy nonsense. But you saw it happen in WCW. The goofy nonsense in wrestling just leads to the death of the product.
What do you think of the TNA concept with weekly pay-per-views?
Well, it's an interesting concept. It's. I hope it works for them. It's hard without television, to get a big audience.
I was just, not to interrupt you, but I was just reading some numbers and to throw more numbers at you, but they're up 22% since last month. So.
Yeah, but see now, so their product is based on word of mouth, and they use the internet a lot.
Right.
As their television, and because their product has been good and has been, an alternative and a lot of action stuff, like you said, and because they're bringing in surprises. You can bring in a bunch of young guys that can do free flips and land on their feet, but if people don't know them, there's a whole bunch of them. Vince has a whole bunch of them. There's a whole bunch of them out there, and NWA's got a bunch of new guys. But the old guys, if you can start bringing the Road Warriors one week, and this guy this week, and someone else next week, and pretty soon you don't know what you're seeing, but you're seeing some names.
Yeah.
And you need names to bring up the new guys. Larry Zbyszko would have never become a wrestling star unless I had a feud with Bruno Sammartino, who was a superstar. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you need a...
So basically, if a nobody gets involved with a somebody, he becomes a somebody.
You need a star to make a star.
Yeah. If there's two nobodies flopping around, nobody cares.
Right. Before we close up, I'm just going to play a little word association. So I'm going to say a name, and you tell me.
It's the new thing. Everybody on the radio is doing a test now.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I'm just going to say somebody's name, and you tell me your opinion of them, or if you have a funny story or something, let me know. Vince McMahon Sr.
Oh, Vince Sr. He was a smooth guy. He was a classy man. You'd always see him in the garden. He had that expensive jacket on, that brown cashmere thing, and he'd always jingle like 4 or 5 quarters in his hand. That was like his gimmick. He had 4 or 5 quarters in his hand, and he'd like jingle them as he talked to you and walk down the hallway. He was a very nice guy, and he was a typical old school territory promoter, and it was really fascinating. When I worked for him, I was like 22, 23. I was just starting. And I was in the keep my mouth shut, keep my ears open mode, so I could learn everything. He was an interesting character. His vices were, he loved the racetrack, but he loved professional boxing more than he did wrestling. He made his money with the wrestling business, but he would really like to, he wanted to be more involved in professional boxing. He's a big box fan.
Shelly Martell.
Oh, she's a sweetheart, and she's a real character too. If you ever want to have a fun time, you got to hang out with Sherry. She's just a trip. I used to love to go to the casinos and hang out with her. We had a lot of fun together. She's a fun chick.
Vern Gagne?
Well, Vern was a classic. He Yeah, he was a great